Hi, I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. I have just read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, in which he tells a story inspired by his own journalistic work about an immigrant family, then following an immigrant man from this family who travels from east of Europe to Chicago to work at the meat market there, and how that's not an easy way to live your life. And it made me think about Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, who I've also read and didn't enjoy.
Yeah.
And I tried to figure out that these books are very similar types of books. But even though if you've read both of them, you would know that they politically stand on opposite sides of one another. And politically, personally, I are leaning more towards Upton Sinclair than Ayn Rand. But I then wanted to try to understand do I like The Jungle more as a work of literature, just because I am closer to the political standpoints that The Jungle is promoting, both being pieces of propaganda, or is there actually something to say about the way The Jungle is written makes it a better book than Ayn Rand? I am now trying to sort of figure out my own biases, and I want you to listen to all of my points and to comment if you agree with what I am saying, if you think I'm overlooking something, especially regarding Ayn Rand's book, or am I sort of correct in that not only am I my own biases, but there is something here? Or am I wrong and they're both bad pieces of literature? So I've presented Upton Sinclair's and what he is. Upton Sinclair is a very famous American socialist, and he used his sort of experience as a journalist to promote socialism in the US and in a US context. Ayn Rand is probably what we would call a libertarian. She was very focused on the individual's rights, and she was also very much focused on sort of what the American dreams is portraying, that you should have the right to build yourself up in a world and not be stopped by anyone or any system. And she illustrates this in Atlas Shrugged. At least she tries to illustrate it in Atlas Shrugged. Even before I read Sinclair, I didn't really think that she did a good job with it. Where Atlas Shrugged, her magnum opus, as she herself calls it, writes about a train company and about different characters who want to build this huge train empire and how they overcome the different obstacles that they face. So I do have a script for this one, so apologize if I look down during my points, but I do want to be as critical on my own views as I can be. And that's why I sort of want to have a more script point to it. So what we can say is that while both of these books are very different in the political standpoint that they promote, they are otherwise very similar in their purpose and what they want to do. So both are, in lack of a better term, pieces of propaganda that is trying to promote their political view. and they try to use this novel to illustrate that their political view is valid. And usually with then having the sort of one main character in a larger context of characters. I read Atlas Shrugged first. Now, one of the reasons why I didn't enjoy Atlas Shrugged, and I don't think it quite worked for me as a political book, is that rather than creating a very realistic type of book and realistic type of characters, she builds on a literary tradition, whether she's aware of it or not, more similar to Homer with the Iliad and the Odyssey, where you have these characters that are larger than life. And their counter characters are more caricatures than anything else. And I want to read a part of the book towards the end where I laughed out loud because it became so absurd for me, being a political book. And that's what I'm more with both of them, that I do read them as political books. So this is towards the end of Atlas Shrugged, and I'm very sorry that I'm now going to spoil a scene from Atlas Shrugged, but this maybe sort of illustrates why I don't think that this book worked, not just because I don't agree with the politics. So you do have sort of the main character, sort of the main hero of the book being John Galt. And this is in a society where they have introduced socialism, and John Galt is the libertarian soul hero that is trying to fight the system. And John Galt has now been captured by this socialist system. That's fine. Everything of that is fine. Because he's been touting his liberalistic views and defying what the socialistic view is. And all of that is brilliant. Brilliant up sort of, yes, we are now in a sort of not our everyday, but a sort of a science fiction inspired genre. Brilliant, no problem with that. So the part starts. In the cellar room, under the ground, Dr. Ferris, Wesley March, and James Taggart sat in armchairs lined up against one wall. A machine that looked like a small cabinet or irregular shape stood in a corner across from them. Its face bore rows of glass dials, each dial marked by a segment of red. A square screen that looked like an amplifier, rows of numbers, rows of wooden knobs, and a plastic button. A single lever controlling a switch at one side and a single red glass button at the other. The face of the machine seemed to have more expression than the face of the mechanic in charge of it. He was a husky young man in a sweat-stained shirt with sleeves rolled above the elbows. His pale blue eyes were glazed by an enormous, conscious concentration on his task. He moved his lips once in a while as if reciting a memorized lesson. Brilliant writing. She's a good writer when it comes to painting pictures, describing a mood in a scene. A short wire led from the machine to an electric storage battery behind it. Long coil of wire like the twisted arms of an octopus stretched towards across the stone floor from the machine to a leather mattress spread under a cone of violet light. John Galt, our main hero, lay strapped to the mattress. He was naked. The small metal discs of electrodes at the ends of the wires were attached to his wrists, his shoulders, his hips, and his ankles. A device resembling a stethoscope was attached to his chest and connected to the amplifier. Now, we are in the 1950s, so there is one part of this that, if it was written today, probably would have been mentioned explicitly. But so again, she clearly sort of is taking inspiration from the superhero narratives that were quite sort of big in the 1950s all the way from the 1930s. You can absolutely imagine the scene and the torture that he is now going to have to withstand to be able to be true to his libertarian views, and how a socialistic society will punish anyone who steps out of line. "Get this straight," said Dr. Ferris, addressing him for the first time. "We want you to take full power over the economy of the country. We want you to become a dictator. We want you to rule the country. Understand? We want you to give orders and to figure out the right orders to give. What we want, we mean to get. Speeches, logic arguments, or passive obedience won't save you now. We want ideas, or else. We won't let you out of here until you tell us the exact measures you'll take to save our system. Then we'll have you tell it to the country over the radio." I'm sorry, Ayn Rand, you've kind of lost me here. The concept that become my dictator, or I'm going to punish you, is absurd to me. I can absolutely buy that he is being tortured. I can buy that they want him to say, okay, go out and say you were wrong, or we'll torture you. And then he'll sort of just lie there and take it. But them sort of saying, tell us what to do, be our dictator, or we'll torture you, it's not realistic. That's not how people work. This is some kind of wet dream, and I'm not for it. This is absolutely absurd scene, and it's the sort of the culmination of everything. I don't understand what you want with this, because this is not realistic. This is wish fulfillment that your enemy, if you want to say that about any political party, is going to stand there and beg you for you to lead them in this kind of way. It's not realistic. And that's why I didn't like it. Now, she has some sort of small scenes before this that are very similar to this one, sort of that builds up this more, that sort of the characters are more idealistic than they are realistic, and the scenes are more wish fulfillment than I feel realistic scenes where you sort of take the other side's arguments or just your own arguments in a realistic setting, which I think is the purpose of a political book. Because why else write a political book? Now, characters being sort of idealistic is absolutely something you can sort of do, and it can work. Homer did it because that was part of the genre at the time. But he didn't write sort of political books. He wrote books that talked about morals and ethics and told about what people shouldn't or shouldn't do ethically. His characters were people to emulate, not a sort of a realistic debate on what kind of political standpoint we should have. So even before I read The Jungle, Ayn Rand lost me by sort of creating wish fulfillment more than a legitimate political discussion. And I might agree that also the rest of the book might be tainted by this scene, but I do have other scenes in the book that I think were weird or sort of didn't work for me. Another scene where this happened was about where she was commenting on the union, and so they were going to build a railroad where that required the drivers of the train to do something that was risky to their health. And the union came in and said, we will forbid it. Anyone who drives for you will be kicked out of the union and not be allowed to drive any other place. So having someone do this would actually risk a lot of things for them. And they said, no, we'll do it, we will support it. And there is this scene where after this discussion, where they're still saying we're going to do this, there will be drivers that will support me. The day after, they come to the office and there are tons of drivers who are there clamoring for this position. And that is in it of itself great. It's a great way to sort of discuss, should unions step in to stop someone doing something dangerous that the individual worker is willing to do. So that is fine. But then they go off on a monologue on how they have done a great job, because there are workers and train drivers who is willing to do this very risky thing for him. You're not doing anything. The drivers are the ones who are risking something here. So what could have then worked as a scene pointing to how the drivers should be the ones deciding this, not the unions, ends up being this speech about how I'm so perfect. So again, that's what I mean. But is it here? So that's what I think I then enjoyed with The Jungle, and why I think The Jungle is objectively a better book than Atlas Shrugged, because The Jungle is then more realistic. So Upton Sinclair did have a lot of his own journalistic work as inspiration for it, and the characters suffer in his book. They absolutely suffer. And it, again, it's somewhat believable, because we do know that he, as a journalist, talked about the suffering, and other sort of books we know that has done research on it is talking about the suffering. But then you can also say that maybe the fact that they are suffering so much makes it unrealistic, but I don't. So that's again why I sort of think that The Jungle is a more realistic book, and therefore a better political book. When it comes to the endings, I do think that Atlas Shrugged did a better job than The Jungle, in the sense that Atlas Shrugged had an ending. The Jungle just sort of peters off with the characters, and they end up having a lot of socialist speeches at the end. So they didn't just, they never really ended. It just, let me hear now monologue for you, which I think is a disservice to the main character. And therefore, I wouldn't really say that there is an ending, in the sense that Atlas Shrugged very clearly has an ending. And again, I don't think necessarily that Atlas Shrugged, just sort of the things that she does in it, objectively needs to necessarily be bad. if she had sort of written more of an ethical book than a political book, I think that it could have worked just fine. Even though that scene where they're saying, become our dictator or I will torture you, is so absurd that I think that no matter the genre, I probably would have laughed out loud, because no one says that except in someone's wet dream. No one says that. But again, going back to Homer, which has sort of a lot of similarities with Atlas Shrugged. But so that is my thoughts on why I enjoyed one book more than the other outside of just their political standpoints. And I really want to hear what you think about it. As I stated, I have an idea that for it to be a good political book, it needs to be a realistic book, in compared to, for example, an ethical book, which can be more unrealistic, sort of having more idealized point of view. And the reason for that is, of course, when you're talking about politics, you're talking about interactions in the day-to-day. That is what politics sort of means. And therefore, any book that discusses that should be then set in a realistic setting, even if it is not our normal setting. So 1984 is a good example that you can absolutely set a political book in a fantastical setting, in a dystopian, but it's still a realistic setting, which I don't think that Atlas Shrugged did, even if it very clearly is in the form of a dystopia. Have you read both books? What do you think are my weak arguments, or do you agree with my assessments? I really want to hear what people think about this, so leave your comments down below. And if you sort of haven't read The Jungle and Atlas Shrugged, have you read something similar that can sort of point to this whole discussion of what makes a good political book good? And thank you for listening to me screaming it.